Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to do a graphite pencil drawing of a sparrow, and I'm going to use matte graphite pencils. So let's go. I'm going to do the sketch with one of the lighter or harder graphite pencils, and HB or maybe a little bit of 2B. Now if you look at the reference photo, you will see that the left side and the bottom side of the bird is darker, which means that the light source is coming from above and from the right. We're going to stick to that to establish the contrast between the light side and the shadow side, and this will help us create a more realistic looking shape of a bird. So the pencils I'm using are Faber-Castell Pit Graphite Matte pencils, which are slightly different from the conventional graphite pencils because they have no graphite shine. The first thing I'm going to do once the sketch is done is I'm going to shade the background a little bit with a bit of 2B. I just want to add a little bit of value to the background, just so that it's not completely blank, and I'm going to blend that with a paper towel and maybe a little bit with a brush. But the idea is to create a background that is barely there, just so that there is something, that it's not completely empty, and so that I can create a little bit more depth in my drawing. So I'm going to start with a beak. For no particular reason other than the fact that it's on the top left, and I normally work from top to bottom and from left to right to minimize smudging. And I'm going to go right in with one of the darkest pencils I have. This is a 14B in that Faber-Castell matte graphite range, because I have some very dark shadow areas here. Now the good thing about these pencils, just like any graphite pencils for that matter, is that they can be sharpened very well and they can produce some very fine details. This drawing is done on paper that is about 5 times 9 inches in size, so it's a smaller sketch, but I'll still be able to put in a lot of detail in there. The bird is standing on a branch, and I'm going to shade the branch as well. The left side is going to be darker. Now first I established a bit of that contrast between the light side and the shadow side, and then I started adding some detail and texture. For blending, I'm using a brush, but sometimes it's a good idea to rotate the drawing, because that way you can point the tip of the flat brush and blend more easily to preserve that clean edge. After the initial shading, and after I've established enough range of value so that I can give that branch an appearance of volume, I'm adding a bit of texture by adding some of these horizontal lines so that it looks like actual tree branch. I'm moving on with the bird, and I'm going to draw the eye here. I'm going to leave a white space here for the catch light in the eye, and I'm going to work around that with that 14B, the darkest pencil that I have. And I'm going to draw also some of the darker bits around the eye, but this time I'm going to switch to a slightly lighter pencil. This is a 10B, and I'm going to use a combination of these two to draw the shadow areas on this middle and left side of the bird's head. Naturally, the top part of the beak is going to be lighter because it's facing up towards the light source, and the same thing with the head. Now, what's also making things a little bit more complicated is the fact that the colors on the bird vary as well. So the sparrow will have some brownish colors, brownish feathers, so it'll also have some black feathers or dark feathers, but there will also be some lighter patches, some lighter feathers which are almost white, and I have to include those as well, but they won't always appear completely white because some of them will also be in the shadow. So I have to shade the bird and stay consistent with the light source, and at the same time I need to show the relationship between those darker and lighter feathers, or darker and lighter colors of the feathers on the bird. Here I'm moving on to the legs and trying to define the lower part of the body a little bit more. And I'm adding some more darker details here, again using the darkest pencil, because there's a lot of shadow here under the bird's body and around the legs. It's actually one of the darkest bits on the drawing, and I'm going to shade this lower part of the branch a bit more than the upper portion, because there's going to be a bit more shadow here. But again, the left side is going to be a bit darker. Now I'm going to do a little bit more work on the lower part of the bird's body, and I'm going to start tentatively by drawing some of these interrupted shapes, because I have some darker feathers or groups of darker feathers interrupted by slightly lighter ones. But at the very bottom they're all kind of merging into a darker shape because it's all in the shadow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw all of this with this 14B and make it as dark as possible. Now you can see as I'm drawing these shadow shapes, they are almost merging into a single shape, because you can pull a continuous line from the beak all the way to the tail, because all of that lower portion of the bird, which is facing away from the light source, is in the shadow. Now this is a very good idea to split the shape into a lighter and darker portion of the body, and to create or to link the shadow areas, to link the darker shapes into a single shape. And the benefit of that is that it actually makes it easier to emphasize the lighter parts of the body. This contrast allows the viewer to understand the shape of the animal or the bird a bit better. So this is just one of the benefits to linking those shadow areas. And of course, this contrast will also improve the overall appearance of your drawing, whether you look at it from up close or whether you look at it from a distance. Because when somebody looks at this drawing at a distance, or maybe just looks at a thumbnail of this for this video, they'll immediately understand the shape by looking at these larger contrasts between the shadow area around the belly and the bottom of the beak and the top part of the bird's body. Here I added a bit more texture to the leg and a bit of shadow under it. And now I'm going to move on with the rest of the body. And the feathers in general can be somewhat complex to draw. But when I draw birds, I'm always trying to find a way to simplify things a little bit, because I'm not particularly fond of drawing feathers. Now the colors of the feathers, they vary, as well as the shape and the length and the size of them. And the situation is kind of similar as with the fur on furry animals. So similarly, you also have to pay attention to the length of your strokes so that you can match the length of those feathers, or the small tiny feathers that the larger feathers consist of. and some of these fine small feathers almost look like hairs. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to produce a texture that kind of looks like those small fine feathers. But before I do that, I'm going to do what I'm doing now, which is establish some of these darker shapes first. And here is where I need to pay a little more attention to my reference photos so that I could place them correctly. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be 100% accurate. In fact, I don't really care if it's not 100% accurate, but I want it to be close to what it actually looks like on the bird. Because I'm drawing a sparrow, this is a male sparrow, and I want it to look like the actual bird. So I first placed some of those darker feathers, and then I'm going to work around them and in between them to draw some of the lighter feathers. And these darker shapes, these darker feathers that I drew first are going to help me navigate through the rest of the body of the bird. This cheek area and the neck area that almost looks like a necklace is going to remain lighter. Some parts of it are going to be completely white, but I'm going to add a few strokes on top of them to imitate the appearance of very small, fine feathers. There's also going to be a few lighter feathers here and there, like on the chest area and maybe on the wing. But like I said, because these are also partly in the shadow, they aren't going to appear completely white. I'll also need to shade these individual feathers that the wing consists of in a logical manner so that the shadows on them are more or less consistent with the light source, even though that can be a little bit confusing because of the colors of the feathers themselves. You don't want to get too caught up into drawing these textures and individual feathers. The important thing is to establish those larger contrasts, which is why probably the crucial part of the drawing process was me drawing that large dark shadow area at the bottom, under the beak, around the belly area and under the wing, and of course under the bird on the branch. So when I connected that large shadow area, the most important part of the job was done, in the sense that the shape of the bird was already defined, and the rest are just details, where it's pretty much up to you to decide how realistic or how detailed you want to make the drawing. You can pay a little more attention to the exact shape and the positioning of each and every one of these individual feathers, or maybe you can simplify things a little bit. I made a fairly realistic looking bird, but I'm not going to draw super detailed feathers. After all, my reference is not super detailed either, but I'm just gonna try to, like I said, I'm just gonna try to make this distribution of lighter and darker colors similar to the actual bird. Here around the wing, actually, I simplified the feathers a little bit. There are fewer of them than in my reference, but probably nobody's going to notice. I'm going to continue here with a 10B, drawing these smaller, finer feathers that look like hairs. And then I'm going to continue on with the tail. We're also going to have some darker lines or darker shapes on the tail itself. But I need to split the tail into several large overlapping feathers. So the size of those feathers on the bird varies, just like the length of the hair on the animal's fur. Similarly on birds, the length of the size of the feathers varies depending on the part of the body. So around the wing and the tail area, those are some of the biggest feathers from what I can tell. I'm not an expert in anatomy, but that's just what I see. And I just have this top portion of the bird's body to finish. And here I'm actually going to switch to some slightly lighter colors, using a little bit more of the 2B and some others. Now I'm using those designations that exist in this bit graphite matte range. But if you're using conventional graphite pencils, it's usually going to be no darker or no softer than 8B. But there's no doubt that you can do something like this in regular graphite pencils as well. I just prefer these pencils because there's hardly any shine. But in terms of how they perform, they are very similar to regular graphite pencils, except that I think that regular graphite pencils are a little bit softer and maybe just a little bit easier to blend. Here I covered the rest of the background with a bit of 2B, because like I said, I didn't want to leave the background completely white. And I'm just going to draw just a few slightly darker areas here and there, maybe some suggestions of some blurry shapes in the distance, but like I said, the background is barely there, barely visible. I just wanted to have a tiny bit of value there. And as a finishing touch, I decided to refine the texture of this tree branch a little bit by taking away a bit of value and adding some lighter marks using a pencil eraser. This is a Kohinoor pencil eraser, by the way. I also use that kneaded eraser. Now the drawing is done, as you can see. So I'm just going to assign it at the bottom. I'm just going to use 10B to pull a few finishing touches here at the bottom. Maybe just to clean up that edge a little bit. And I'm going to assign it in the lower right corner, and now the drawing is done. If you want to see longer videos, don't forget to check out my Patreon, and also don't forget to subscribe, give me a like and comment, and check out my other videos. I'm going to see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.